NBC News international correspondent Raf Sanchez joins us now from Tel Aviv with the latest on this. Raf, good morning. So just tell us, what do we know about these negotiations and the possibility of a deal?
Joe, Savannah, good morning. We just learned in the last couple of minutes that CIA Director Bill Burns is back in Qatar today. He's meeting with the Qatari Prime Minister about this potential ceasefire hostage deal. And he is the latest senior American administration official to head to the Middle East, try to push this deal over the line. We, of course, had Jake Sullivan, the president's national security advisor, here last week, along with one of the president's top advisors on the Middle East. In terms of the deal that is taking shape, it is similar in many ways to the deal that we were talking about in the summer. It would take place over several phases. The first phase would see a ceasefire, 6 weeks or so. Hamas would release roughly 30 living hostages. That could include Americans. And in return, Israel would release hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. Israeli forces would withdraw from major population centers inside of Gaza, the big cities. What is different about this deal to the one discussed over the summer is Hamas has made a couple of concessions. And one of the key ones is they do appear prepared, at least in this first phase of the deal, to accept the presence of Israeli forces on the Egypt-Gaza border, that key area known as the Philadelphia corridor. Netanyahu has been adamant that he will not leave there, at least in the first phase of a deal. He says if Israel does, that would allow Hamas to rearm. And it does appear that that is one of the position shifts that has helped to unlock this momentum. We should say, guys, Israeli and American officials, they are stressing optimism, but they are also saying this is not finished, and we've been here before. These talks could still unravel. Guys.
So, Raf, some good news there on what's kind of being given, but do we know what the sticking points still are for each side? What's standing in the way?
Yeah, so the sticking points are pretty familiar also, Savannah. Number one is Netanyahu and his right-wing government, which includes members of the far right, are very reluctant to end this war altogether. There is a lot of concern among the families of Israeli hostages that they might agree to the first phase of the deal, 6-week ceasefire, roughly 30 hostages out, but then not agree to go to the second phase of the deal, which would see the release of all the hostages in exchange for an end to the war. So that is one concern. There is also just a lot of technical detail. How many hostages will be released each day? Will they be men? Will they be women? Will they be civilians? Will they be soldiers? And where exactly Israeli forces will be allowed to remain in that first phase of the deal? So a lot of the big contours have been sketched out, but it's these devilish details that are being worked on. Guys.
And Raf, what's interesting is rather than go to Cairo for the ceasefire talks, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with military officers in Syria. So what's the latest on Israel's involvement there in Syria? And just also, how does Netanyahu's absence affect these ceasefire negotiations?
So Netanyahu has not been going to these talks personally. He has been sending his spy chiefs, usually, as his chief negotiators. So it's not really a surprise that the Israeli prime minister isn't in the room himself. He was literally inside of Syria yesterday, which is pretty stark, given that up until a couple of weeks ago, that country was run by the Assad regime, a sworn enemy of Israel. He was meeting with Israeli forces who have occupied a number of strategic areas near that buffer zone between Israeli and Syrian positions on the Golan Heights. And he was basically reiterating that Israeli forces are going to remain on the ground in Syria until they get reassurances that this new Syrian regime is not a threat.
Guys, Raf, thank you.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.